Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Mark Hurl. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Mainline Unitarian Church. Welcome. It's super to have you with us. Our worship team today includes our ministerial intern, Caroline Bright, our Director of Lifespan Faith Development, Dawn Starr Saris-Borschelt, our Worship Associate, Chris Cavalieri, our Music Director, Dr. Vincent Craig. We are Unitarian Universalists, gathering in a loving community of faith to support one another as we search for meaning and purpose, working together to bring compassion, equity, and responsible stewardship to the world we share. We affirm religious freedom and celebrate diversity, as all are inherently worthy and dignified. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your journey, personal circumstance, or favorite quarterback, you are welcome here. Especially warm greeting to those who are visiting today. You can find more information on the welcome table in our atrium, on the screen outside the main meeting room, or on our website. Please join us after the service for coffee and tea in the fireside room across the hall. I also want to point you to the announcements found in the order of service. Now, if you would silence your cell phones while I welcome Caroline Bright for the Ministerial Intern's Minute.
Again, while Reverend Dave's away. So I want to make sure that everybody who's here checks out all of the announcements that are located on the flip side. I know our order of service is riveting. It is good. It's full of good stuff, but there are tons of announcements. And I wanted to take a moment to highlight the Reproductive Justice Planning meeting that is coming up tomorrow, appropriately on Galentine's Day. It's via Zoom, so you can tune in from just about anywhere. And of course, the Minister's Fellowship meal, it's Jamaican Blast, everybody. That's right, Dave and I are cooking again. It's going to be a good time. It's here. You can click the Sign Up Genius link that's available on our Facebook page, on the website. We would absolutely love to have you come join us for that. So, without further ado, I think that was an actual literal minute. Feel free to tell Reverend Dave about it. Let's get this show on the road.
So if you will join me in giving voice to our mission, together, we transform lives through love, service, and a welcoming faith.
We light this chalice for all who come to this place. If you have questions, here may you find seekers. If you are lonely, here may you find companions. If you seek justice, here may you find witness. If you are broken, here may you find healing. If you have strength, here may you give service. If you have lost your way, here may you find home.
First of all, let me be clear. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, even Kansas City fans. Today, we will not shame those among us who root for other teams. It's okay. You are welcome here. But here's why I'm optimistic about the world we live in. Tomorrow morning, the Philadelphia School District and other districts across southeastern Pennsylvania and South Jersey have a 2-hour delay. Confession, generally, I do not care about football. I'm a hockey fan. I love baseball. I want sports to be fast, beautiful, or both. American football is neither of those things. But today, I am a diehard, passionate, embarrassing Eagles superfan. Yeah. Okay, it's not because I enjoy the game of football. Don't even get me started on the passing rules. I don't understand the downs system. It makes no sense. You're playing a sport back. I digress. But I am a fan today because I love the wild, weird, and wonderfully bizarre stuff that is at the heart of Philadelphia. This is a place where fans riot if the team wins. Okay. When there's a loss, there's a general acceptance and there's a sense of inevitability. But when a Philadelphia sports team wins, well, those light poles had better be greased. In my neighborhood in the lower northeast of Philly, we go outside and we literally cheer together in the street when there's a win. Okay, honking car horns and fireworks create a cacophony that both delights and frustrates me, especially when Toby has just gone to sleep. It delights and frustrates me much like the city itself. Philly is a place where so many differences can make everything feel disjointed and disconnected, but it's also a place where there are amazingly cool displays of community. To me, tomorrow's school delay is a symbol of community in action, of shared interests and enthusiasm. And as weird as it may be, that is a perfect Philly example of love in action. Tomorrow, kids across the area will get to start their school day late because they're part of a huge community that supports celebration. Tonight, most of us will gather and watch and eat and cheer as part of a community of fans. And now, here, this morning, let us ground ourselves in joy as we worship that which is most holy, love and community. So please rise as you are able and join in singing, "Enter, Rejoice, and Come In."
So our story this morning is about an invisible thread, an invisible string, but I thought it might be a bit of fun to have an actual visible string, too. So I'm going to toss somebody some string, and then I'm going to ask you to unroll it a little bit and toss it to somebody else, and just keep it going around the room while we do the story. See, I am definitely not a sports ball person, because I can't even throw a ball of yarn to my own kid. You have to hold on to it. Yeah, you hold on to it and then throw it to somebody else. And then you be careful when you get up, because it will be a mess. But that's okay, life is messy. Okay. The very best news ever had begun to spread all over the world, one heart at a time. Shout it from the mountaintops. Every single one of us is connected to those we love by invisible strings. And you, at this very moment, may feel the string of someone close to you, even if they aren't here. You can't see it, but it's real. Our strings reach to everyone we know. All of those people have hundreds of strings, even when they get lost under the chairs. Soaring high over rocky peaks and across the 7 seas, deep into jungles and valleys, and winding through the busiest of cities, all these strings crisscross one another and create a nest that covers the planet, interlacing us together, cradling us forever. The invisible web. The web has no borders and wraps every continent. Within it live butterflies and flowers, starfish and seahorses, lions and ants, rivers and snowstorms, and all human beings, which means you and me too. Some say it even reaches to our ancestors and those we cherish in the beyond. One tug on a string sends love to every one of us, woven together in this divine tapestry. And that means just one good deed travels across the entire web. Everything is linked. But sometimes folks forget that when they can't feel their strings, they forget about our invisible web. And that's when the strings get tangled up. Violence and war can erupt when too many of us forget the web. When strings are ignored, they can become weak and begin to unravel. But the more people who care for the web, the stronger it remains. The web feels like every parent since the beginning of time, holding and protecting each one of us in millions of gentle arms. What could be stronger than all those hands holding us close? A ball of yarn hitting us in the head. No. So many supportive fingers can always find a way to untangle strings so that love can flow again. But it's up to every one of us to spread the word. Our time is right now. If we remember the web and tug at it often, nobody will ever be left out. We will see others more clearly. The people of the world will look into each other's eyes. They will smile at one another. The invisible web is real. Someone cries with joy as they stroke their cat, who purrs the news to the stars, and the stars whisper the secret to the clouds, who share it with the songbirds, who serenade the world with this exquisite melody of love at the start of each morning and all during the day, until, as the invisible web glitters in the magic of twilight, the owls take over and hoot the news through the night. The invisible web is alive. Its time is right now. It breathes as we breathe, pulsating all over our earth, the single heartbeat of life and love. And do you know what that makes us all? One very big family. Thank you for playing with me. The yarn can stay where it is, and I will clean it up later unless people feel moved to collect it. And I would invite the children and youth to their classes now.
Here at MLUC, we donate half of our weekly collection to a worthy organization in need through our olfactory outreach program. And the recipient for February's olfactory outreach contribution is the Timothy School, located in Berwyn, whose mission is to empower students living with autism spectrum disorder with increased communication, social, cognitive, and life skills. Donations from our olfactory outreach will go toward a new program to help young adults and their families stay connected with one another and the larger community once they've graduated from high school. This program will help combat social isolation by providing opportunities to connect with each other and the community through a series of regular events, activities, and outings. You're invited to make an electronic donation if you'd like to watch, if you're watching remotely, or if you're in the sanctuary and prefer to make a cashless donation, please follow the instructions you see on the screen. The offering will now be greatly received. In Candles of Community, we share our joys and sorrows. This week, our hearts are moved by the effects of the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. For those who have lost loved ones, for those who have lost homes, the grief is unimaginable. We light a candle of compassion and support to empower the world's response to our neighbors in Turkey and Syria. For our neighbors in Turkey and Syria, we hold you in our hearts. Is Kathy Landy here? Okay. Kathy has asked us to please light a candle of concern for her niece Stacy's husband, Mark, who's been found to have 2 nodules on his lungs, which are driving deep concern. Further testing next week brings hope for better news. For Mark and Stacy, and for all who love them, we hold you in our hearts. Kathy also asked us to light a candle of celebration for Adelia, our Afghan mother who has started her new job at Wawa and is tired but doing well with her new activity. For Adelia and her family, we hold you in our hearts. We light a candle of healing for Ron Rose's brother, Mark, who underwent open heart surgery in Seattle on Wednesday to replace a damaged heart valve. He's now in the ICU in recovery, and Ron is currently in Seattle to be with him. For Ron and Mark and their family, we hold you in our hearts. And we light a candle to celebrate the life of Barbara Hayes, who died this week at Bryn Mawr after breaking her hip. She was 100, almost 101. And Jeanette Wheeler, who asked for this candle, reports that with a sound mind and wonderful disposition that kept everyone around her smiling and alert, Barbara was a very long-time active member, still involved in an MLUC book club. She and her husband Harold led a drama group and organized wonderful, memorable productions at church, including The Grinch That Stole Christmas and Spoon River. For the family and friends of Barbara Hayes, we hold you in our hearts. Gary Geoghegan asks us to light a candle of healing for Jeanette Wheeler, who's recovering from hip surgery. Jeanette, for you and your family, we hold you in our hearts. We also light a candle of sorrow for Gary Geoghegan's cousin Anne, who last week was reported and went into hospice. A life celebration will be held in March 4th in Dallas, but we light a candle to celebrate the life and the sorrow of the loss of Gary's cousin Anne. For Gary and Anne, we hold you in our hearts. And Gary has also asked us to light a candle of speedy recovery for Valerie, who's struggling with an eye infection. Gary also begs your forgiveness, Anne, that he submitted this request. So for both Gary and Anne, we hold you in our hearts. And our reflective reading today comes from Maya Angelou. In the flush of love's light, we dare to be brave. And suddenly we see that love costs all we are and all we'll ever be. Yet it's only love which sets us free. I invite you to take a moment of silent reflection, to settle yourself where you are. I'll ring you in and out.
As anyone who has ever read Laura Ingalls Wilder's books or watched Little House on the Prairie knows, for the first half of the 19th century in the newly formed United States, westward expansion was the name of the game. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803, coupled with the idea of manifest destiny, led many newcomers away from the New England and East Coast towns they'd been born in search of land and better prospects. While we now know better that this was the colonization of land stolen from natives, the story that many of us have learned about it and the narrative while it happened was very much in line with Wilder's books. One such couple at the time were Universalists Asa and Leffia Brown, who hailed from the best state in the Union then and now, Vermont. They left the rugged hills of the Green Mountains and went to the wild and untamed wilderness of Michigan. Ooh, at the time, it was foreign and exotic. They named their first child Olympia. And just as they almost certainly didn't recognize the harm that they were perpetuating in colonizing the West, they probably didn't realize that their daughter would help change the world for the better. After graduating from Antioch College in 1860, just 20 years after the first woman in America received her college degree, Olympia set out to become a minister. Even though at that time there were no theological schools that welcomed women. Lori Carter Noble writes, the Unitarian School of Meadville, Pennsylvania replied to her request for admission, saying that the trustees thought it would be too great an experiment to admit a woman. Oberlin replied that she could be admitted, but could not participate in any public exercises. Finally, Ebenezer Fisher, president of the Universalist Divinity School at St. Lawrence University, offered her admission, but added that he did not think women were called to the ministry, but I leave that between you and the great head of the church. This, Olympia wrote, was exactly where it should be left. But when I arrived, I was told I had not been expected and that Mr. Fisher had said I would not come, as he had written so discouragingly to me. I had supposed his discouragement was my encouragement. Ultimately, Olympia was ordained a Universalist minister, the first woman to attain full ministerial standing recognized by any denomination in the United States. She took an active role in the women's suffrage movement and was one of the few original suffragists who lived to vote in the 1920 presidential election. As many of us know, the defining theology of universalism is universal salvation. Universalists believe that the God of love would not create a person knowing that that person would be destined for eternal damnation. They concluded that, therefore, all people must be destined for salvation. Universalists could trace their ideas around sin and salvation back to Origen, one of the earliest theologians in the first centuries of the church. Don't worry, I'm not going to go all seminarian on Origen for you this morning. American Universalism was the result of the particular set of circumstances that resulted in a number of new styles of Christianity igniting as the United States of America formed. American Universalism developed from the influence of various pietists and Anabaptist movements in Europe, like the Quakers, Moravians, Methodists, Lutherans, and others. While most of the best-known Universalists were New Englanders, like Hosea Ballou of New Hampshire, George de Benneville was an incredibly important person in Universalism in America. Though he was born in England, he was the son of exiled French Huguenot aristocrats, and he immigrated to the United States with a wave of German immigrants who came to Philadelphia in the mid-1700s to a place called Germantown. He ultimately spent the rest of his life providing medical care, such as it was then, and sharing his Universalist beliefs in the Philadelphia area. In fact, his final resting place isn't far from us now. It's just down the road in Germantown, Pennsylvania. You've heard of that place, right? In de Benneville's entry in the Dictionary of Unitarian and Universalist Biography, which, by the way, is a real banger, I would recommend it, John Morgan and Nelson Simonson write of him, because he believed all symbols of the truth equally valid, he could converse across cultures and religions. He thought that taking religious truths literally rather than symbolically was the cause of many religious conflicts. De Benneville thought that if we listened to our inward spirits, we would know that behind every appearance of diversity, there is an interdependent unity in all things. Godly love, De Benneville preached, finds its way in spite of, or even by virtue of, outward variations. That love must be based upon mutual respect for the differences in color, language, and worship, even as we accept with gratitude the differences that tend to unite us. Some of our most important core beliefs as Unitarian Universalists today are wrapped up in those words that de Benneville wrote over 200 years ago. As some of you may know, over at the Unitarian Society of Germantown, they too have an interim minister right now. And it just so happens that Reverend Cheryl is one of the co-chairs of the Unitarian Universalist Association's Article 2 Commission. Recently, they published their final report. Now, for those of you who are intimately aware of the workings of the UUA, you know that Article 2 is part of our bylaws, because we don't believe in dogma or doctrine, but you know what we do believe in? Bylaws. Exactly. So our principles are part of our bylaws. It's Article 2. And this commission has put together a report that says that in place of the principles, we should have 6 values with love at the center. The report reads, "Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love." The values they've identified and have determined to be inseparable from one another and are in no particular order are interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. I have been assured repeatedly that this does not mean the principles are vanishing, which is excellent news to me, but rather a distillation of the principles into simple, clear values so that we can articulate them to ourselves and to others, so that more people who don't yet realize they're Unitarian Universalists can realize that they are UUs. I don't know what's going to happen at this year's General Assembly with the report, but as someone who is a big fan of the principles, I have to say that these values do resonate with me as a simplified way of articulating what the foundation of Unitarian Universalism is. The report expands on each value. So for pluralism, they say, "We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect." To me, that sounds a whole lot like George de Benneville's 200-year-old statement that love must be based upon mutual respect for the differences in color, language, and worship. So, okay, I buy it. I'm willing to drink the organically flavored Kool-Aid, okay? Love is at the center of who we are. I'm on board. But as anyone who has ever been in a long-term relationship knows, love alone isn't enough to make a relationship work. Love and values that support it have to be cultivated and encouraged intentionally. But how does that happen? How do people enter into and then maintain relationships? Communication. It can feel like such a cliche, right? Successful relationships require communication. But don't worry, this is not a 1990s self-help book. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships or even just bonds between individuals. I mean every relationship that involves human beings. From the micro to the macro, it's all about communication. On the micro level, when my 9-month-old cries, he's communicating to me that something is wrong. On the macro level, as we experience extreme weather events, we can see that nature or the environment is communicating that something is wrong. Too often, when another person does something or says something, we think we understand what they're trying to communicate, only to later realize that we had completely misinterpreted something. One example of this from my own life that I think about a lot is from a few years ago when I was working as a flight attendant for a major US airline. So I was the lead flight attendant on this particular trip. Go figure, I like to be in front and use the microphone. So I was lead flight attendant, and all of a sudden, we are flying along, and it's been this annoying process. We were delayed coming out of the gate. The Wi-Fi is not working, and people have been asking the entire flight, when is the Wi-Fi going to be back on? When is the This is why we love Wi-Fi on planes. It keeps passengers quiet. It's great. So this one guy in first class has asked me at least twice, do you know when the Wi-Fi is going to be turned back on? I've called the pilot. They don't know. They don't know what's going on with the Wi-Fi. So all of a sudden, call bells start going off in the back. We have not one but two medical emergencies happening simultaneously. So I get on and I make the announcement, if we have anyone with medical experience who's willing to assist the crew, fantastic news. We've got a couple of EMTs in the back. Phenomenal. We're thrilled. Love EMTs. So we're dealing with this. The crew members are in the back juggling two medical emergencies. Another call bell goes off. It's somebody asking for a Coke, of course, right? So the things are amping up, and I'm running to the back. I'm grabbing this medical kit to bring it up to a neurologist in first class who can give us permission to use this particular equipment. I'm running back and forth. And this guy in first class taps me on the arm and says, I'm sorry, but do you know when the Wi-Fi is going to be turned back on? And I was like, you've got to be kidding me, right? So I am annoyed, except I'm not using the word annoyed. And I'm like running all over the place. Okay, I settle. All right. So I'm back in first class, I'm checking on everyone up there, and this guy, again, taps me on the arm, and I'm like, first of all, don't touch the flight attendants, but second, he says, I am so sorry. I know I keep asking about the Wi-Fi, but the reason that I'm on this plane right now is because my son is being airlifted to the children's hospital, and I'm trying to get in touch with my wife. I had completely misunderstood what was happening. He was communicating with me, and I had no idea because of the assumptions that I had made about what was going on. I thought that he was just an annoying white-collar businessman who was selfishly oblivious to the needs of other people. But I was the one who was oblivious in that moment. Now, many of you have met my husband, Joel, and he and I have a lot in common, right? We're both white, nerdy, graduate school educated East Coast Americans. So you'd think, or at least I would think, that we would understand each other. Surely communication wouldn't be a challenge. But alas, I am a Vermonter who grew up overseas, and he's a Philadelphian who grew up in Lawndale. We've been together for 5 years, and consistently, one of us will use a particular word, and the other one will say, wait, what? Just this week, we had an extensive conversation about the slang use and connotations of the word fresh. This is an ongoing situation. I've learned that for all we have in common, my husband and I come from different cultures. When I started at Meadville Lombard Theological School, one of the first things that we did as newly minted seminary students was to take an assessment called the Intercultural Development Inventory. The IDI assesses intercultural competence, the capability to shift cultural perspective, and appropriately adapt behavior to cultural differences and commonalities. So this test assesses where you fall on a continuum of intercultural development. So your placement can range from denial, which consists of a disinterest in other cultures, and an active avoidance of cultural difference. So individuals who they have a denial orientation, they don't see a difference in perception and behaviors as a cultural thing, right? It's characteristic of many individuals who have limited experience with other cultural groups, and therefore operate based on broad stereotypes and generalizations about the cultural other, okay? So then we have polarization, where you see difference, but you're judgmental about it. Then minimization, where one de-emphasizes difference. Acceptance is where you can comprehend the differences. And finally, adaptation, which enables deep cultural bridging across diverse communities. Now, I grew up in 3 different countries. I am a citizen of 2 countries. Intercultural communication, I have got this. Adaptation, here I come. Absolutely. In a surprise twist, I was only kind of right. It turned out that most of the time, particularly when I'm not in another country, I live my life in minimization, as do most of us, as do most UUs. I had acceptance and adaptation skills, but my mindset was definitely focused on minimizing differences in order to avoid conflict, so that we can all be on the same metal tube flying through the air together and have it be calm. While there's nothing wrong with finding common ground to create harmony in the short term, minimizing and ignoring differences can create a lot of unintended harm. In the Jones and Oken framework for understanding the culture that surrounds white supremacy, Tima Oken writes, "My intention is to say that white supremacy culture trains us all to internalize attitudes and behaviors that do not serve any of us, and that's all of us." So one characteristic that can be so harmful is the fear of open conflict. An example of that could look like an emphasis on being polite, setting the rules for how ideas or information or differences of opinion need to be shared in order to be heard. In other words, requiring that people calm down if they are angry, when anger can contain deep wisdom about where the underlying hurt and harm lies. Now, what's the antidote to that behavior? The antidote is to seek connection and to choose love over fear. With connection in place, we can take risks and we can learn from the mistakes that we will inevitably make. So how do we connect? How do we choose love over fear? We have to communicate, and we have to learn how to do it better. We have to cultivate a culture of communication, one that builds on and builds into trust within community. It's no coincidence that communication and community share the same Latin root word, communis, which means common. Universal. Yes, universal, like that idea of salvation promoted by Olympia Brown and George de Benneville. Universal, like us, Unitarian Universalists. Our UU congregations and communities should be places where we don't need to minimize our differences, where we don't need to shrink ourselves or play small in order to be in community with one another, in order to create a beloved community together. When cultural differences or new ideas arise, we can and must embrace them by being curious, not judgmental, even when it makes us uncomfortable. We aren't going to get it right every time, but we must absolutely try again and again and again. Every person in the world, in spite of best intentions, can and will cause harm. But perfectionism is another hallmark of white supremacy culture. Striving to be perfectly anti-colonial, perfectly culturally competent, perfect at communication, that desire many of us have to be perfect at being good people, is actually a part of the very culture that harms and traps every single one of us. So as Rumi wrote, and as we sing here, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come. Come, though you have broken your vows 1,000 times." Love does not require perfection. And since love is at the heart of who we are, individually and collectively, we are not required to be perfect. Love is at the heart of the goal, process, and lived experience of the beloved community we strive for. And so, together, let us look to our history to see where our values can take us in the future. Together, let us learn how to better communicate, take risks, and learn from our mistakes. But most of all, let us do all of this connected by love. Amen, and may it be so. And now, I hope you will join me and rise in body or spirit as we sing our last hymn of today. As we extinguish this chalice and go forth into the world, what I want you to remember today is not just that we passed this ball of yarn creating a web among all of us, but then this community cleaned it up together. That ball of yarn is being rewound right now. And if you need a metaphor for what mainline Unitarian church is, it is that. We create the web and we put things back together when they need to be. Amen, and may it be so.